good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here with all of you here today, and welcome to Chicago for those of you who are not from the area. Is this anyone's first time here? A couple people? Well, you brought pretty nice weather with you, so it's a lot better than it was a couple months ago. So welcome. I hope you have some time to get out and kind of enjoy the city while you're here. As Mark said, I'm here today to talk a little bit about good governance, which sounds like a little bit of a snooze. Let's be honest about that. But I think that good governance provides a structure and framework for all of you to have a successful year as this next year as roundtable presidents. So as Mark mentioned, my name is Melissa Walling. I work at the Institute of Real Estate Management. So we're a membership association like CSCMP is a membership association. Our members manage property. So if any of you are kind of in the warehousing side of it, you may have a property manager who oversees your operations, and they could be a member of my association. My personal background is I currently do oversee our membership and customer service experience, but the reason why I'm here today is I've done a lot of work with our chapters, which is the equivalent of roundtables. And there's a lot of best practices and kind of good governance models that I wanted to share with all of you today. So I was thinking a little bit about how I could make sense of why good governance is important. And I was thinking a little bit about, the FIFA World Cup, which kicked off this week, and the NBA game that was on last night. FIFA and NBA, those are associations. Those are associations, a very different kind of association, but they're associations like CSCMP is. And they have rules and guidelines and playbooks that just foster the development of leaders, provide a platform for sportsmanship, for engagement. They provide a great customer service experience. So these are all things that are important that's why good governance is important to all of you at your roundtable and to CSCMP as a whole. So today we're going to talk a little bit about why it's important. Again, we'll reiterate that topic. We'll go through 3 key areas that you see here on the screen in a bit of a deeper dive that will really help you understand what some of those obligations are that you have as roundtable presidents to uphold some of the governance and policies. All of you have this amazing guidebook in front of you, so we'll highlight a couple things in there. And then lastly, just wrap up by talking about a couple tools that you have for success next year. And I know that the sessions after mine will really build upon that. So for starters, good governance. What does that actually mean? Good governance provides the framework of how a business is run. So it talks a little bit about who are your members, who are your customers, how do you do your business, why are you in business, who makes the decisions in your business. All of these things are part of what's important with good governance. So with that being said, how many of you in your business have some governance, policies, and operations that guide how you do business? What are some examples of those things? Just yell them out. Not everyone at once.
Formal guiding principles.
Formal guiding principles. Thank you. What else? Policies. Thank you. What else? I'm sorry? Compliance training. Good one. Does someone else have one? Statement of policies, tax returns, bylaws, contracts. These are all elements of governance. And what they do is they help guide, they help each person in your organization understand what their role is. The same logic applies to volunteers. They help people understand how decisions are made, how they can participate, how they have a voice. So these are all the same governance, all the same kinds of things that are part of how CSCMP does their business. How many of you before coming here today had kind of thought about CSCMP as being a business? Not many of you, a couple of you. It's kind of common. It's your volunteer gig. It's what you do in your free time. It's, it's what kind of, hopefully you're passionate about, which is why you're here today. But it's something that you do in your free time. But CSCMP, it's a business. And as Mark said, it's one entire organization. And so what we're going to talk a little bit about today is what some of those elements are that you need to be really familiar with. Because part of your obligations as a roundtable president is to go back to your roundtables and make sure that your volunteers, that your program, the people who host your programs and events, and that the attendees at your events are aware of some of these policies. So one of the things that Mark really drove home was this concept of all of you being part of one organization. You are all part of one entity. CSCMP is recognized by the federal government as one organization. And all of you as roundtables are part of that organization. What that means is that the policies that are in place at CSCMP are designed to facilitate the success at both the national headquarters operations level and also of that of the roundtables. So there's one set of articles of incorporation. There's one set of principles that CSCMP has told the federal government that they're going to abide by and that they exist. There's one federal tax return. There's one set of bylaws. There's one set of policies. So hopefully by the time you leave here tomorrow and you head back to your chapter, you'll have a better understanding of how your roundtable can support and enhance and elevate the platform that CSCMP operates under. Because again, it's all part of one global model. So we're going to dive into any questions before I go into three kind of key areas. Do we understand that? Good. Are you all with me? Are we awake? Okay, good. So we're going to talk today about three specific areas. Financial management, which is a little bit about how do we transact business? How much do people pay us? How do we report that money? How is it captured on a tax return? Operation management, how are decisions made? And then again, lastly, most importantly, how do you actually serve your members and the customers and all the non-members who are so prolific at your events, which is a great problem to have. A lot of our chapters just have the same faces over and over at their roundtable, at their chapter events. So that's a great problem. So I captured this piece of the policy manual because at the beginning of all these policies is a statement that you as a roundtable president has a responsibility to ensure that other people understand pretty much what's written in the policy. So all of you as roundtable presidents want to make sure that when you walk out of here tomorrow, you have a real good understanding of what your obligations are. Both you as an individual president, your parts of your leadership team, and also kind of how you uphold those policies. So let's dive a little bit into the financial management piece. How many of you know what a 501c6 is? Anyone? Yes. Ma'am. That's exactly right. For those who couldn't hear, it's the tax-exempt status that CSCMP as a nonprofit organization holds. Why that's important is because all of you, when you're transacting your business, when you're hosting events, when you are soliciting sponsorships, when you're doing joint events, you're operating under this tax-exempt status. So it's important to understand a little bit about what that means. So it does not mean that you're not making money. It does not mean that your nonprofit doesn't mean that you're not having income or that you don't have revenue. What it means is that your purpose of existence is not to create revenue. Your purpose of existence is to advance the supply chain management industry, to provide networking opportunities, to provide education. That's why we exist. It's not to make money. But as part of that, we of course make money, which is a good thing because it keeps us in business. So CSCMP is a professional association The nonprofit status means that we're exempt from paying federal income taxes, but it doesn't mean that you're exempt from paying any taxes whatsoever. So part of what you'll see in some of the policies is based upon the parameters of a joint event. You may need to capture and account for some of that income in a bit of a different way, because on a federal tax return, you just have to capture that in different ways. It also means that, again, we're in a business, so we have to file taxes every year. There are some parts of our income that we do have to pay taxes on. So understanding at the roundtable level, you have a responsibility to account for the finances of your roundtable accurately and accordingly. So what you see is a screenshot of what the federal tax return looks like, which isn't necessarily, I'm not an accountant by any means, but why this is important is because CSCMP is filing one tax return. They are accounting for all the income, all the expenses, all the programming that all of you do at the local level. So there's a couple things that you're responsible for doing as far as sharing some of that information with CSCMP. Does anyone know what some of those policies are that facilitate some of this information sharing of financial data up to CSCMP? Quarterly financial reporting, thank you. What else? Annual audit, thank you. Anything else? There was a couple other good best practices about making sure you have a treasurer that kind of rotates off the board. We actually had, unfortunately, we very recently have had 2 cases at our chapters of staff people embezzling money. So it's really important, again, to think about what are some of the financial structures that you put in place at your own business, and think about putting some of those in place at your roundtable operations. Again, it's easy to think this is my volunteer gig. It's not a business, but it is. Money is changing hands. So with that being said, I wanted to just let all of you know that, even though, again, we're a nonprofit, CSCMP is a nonprofit, after the Enron scandal of 2008-ish, the tax reporting for nonprofits changed dramatically. We are under just as much scrutiny as for-profit organizations are. On our tax returns, we have to indicate that we have whistleblower policies, that we have conflict of interest policies, that we have elections that are fair, that we have people who rotate on and off the board, that we have external audits. So again, all these things are part of the financial operations of CSCMP, and we want those to be part of the financial operations at the roundtable level as well. So I also noticed I believe there's some recommendations on where you bank with that kind of uphold some of the financial security. There's some checks and balances that are recommended that you put in place at your your roundtable. Again, all to support financial management and sound financial management as being a tool for good governance. Does that make sense? Any questions on kind of the financial elements and who we are? We're a nonprofit organization. We're tax exempt. We have a responsibility of sharing information about our income expenses up to the CSCMP national, international. Any questions on that? Any best practices on financial management that anyone wants to share? Yes. That's a great question, and I unfortunately can't speak to that. I mentioned that to Pam, that I'm not clear exactly on how all of this applies internationally. So for those who couldn't hear, he's inquiring as to how this applies to an international roundtable. Can any of the staff in the room speak to this? Yeah, so I think yes, go ahead.
Yes, so Gopal is from India, and so in India, you have to incorporate your roundtable very differently. In China, as an example, we have a company that we had to create in China to run the roundtable activities there, and it's very tied into government regulations. So there are differences in different countries depending on how we incorporate, and they're very strict and stringent. So what you're speaking of is the U.S. platform, but there are a lot of differences around the world.
Good, and that's a good point. It sounds like some of the international roundtables might be separately incorporated, meaning that they're part of a different kind of tax-exempt status and have some different governing rules. So that's a great delineation. The items I just went over would cover all of you who are domestic roundtables. And I'm not sure for the woman from Toronto how that applies to you either. Any other questions? Comments?
Later on this morning, will we get an update on what bank, or is this the appropriate time to ask about the bank?
There's a question about the banking institution.
So that's going to be covered in the treasurer's presentation.
So that'll be covered a little later. Thank you. Any questions on kind of the concept of financial management and security as part of good governance? Good. Well, let's move on to operations. Another part of running any business is having a solid platform for operations. How are leaders selected? How are they identified? How are decisions made? And what role does everyone within the company play in making those decisions? So many of you mentioned you have, you have policy manuals, you have compliance manuals. Some of these things might be outlined in some of those types. You have contracts. At an association level, we have bylaws that identify who our leadership is, who our members are, what role they play in decision making. Do they have a vote? Do they not have a vote? Again, so these would be things that are being defined by CSCMP that would be applicable to all of you at roundtables. A lot of the best practices that I saw in the guidebook relate to, again, having checks and balances. There's some defined leadership roles, which is really important because some of you, hopefully are here intentionally, not that you were kind of told that you're going to be the roundtable president next year, but there may be people on your team who you're just kind of like, hey, get on the board, we need your help. And they don't know why they're there. They don't know what's expected of them. And can you imagine if you had an executive on your leadership team in your business who didn't understand what their role and purpose in being there was? So it's important to have these defined roles for everyone to understand how they contribute and what role do they play. One thing that's really unique about associations is that members make the decision. So there is a staff that supports the operations of CSCMP, but your membership endorses the budget, they set a strategic plan, they create the vision and leadership and mission for the organization. That's all driven by members. So that's something that's a little bit unique to associations, unlike what you do in your business. So one of the reasons why it's really important to understand the policies that surround how decisions are made is because associations can be a little bit, they can be vulnerable to antitrust issues. How many of you remember in 10th grade history class learning about, the Rockefellers, the railroads, and monopolies? So, and I'm sure all of you face some of this in your businesses today. Associations create a platform for competitors to get together in a room behind closed doors. All of you are, in theory, competitors within the same industry, and associations provide that platform for all of you to come together and have conversations. So it is very important. Associations can be a little bit susceptible to antitrust cases because we need to ensure that we are running our business, we are making decisions in a way that follow our policies. Because having sound policies support how you make these decisions that are sound and effective. So again, when it comes to how you elect officers within your chapter, in your roundtable, how you set budgets, how you decide who's in leadership or who's taking charge, there's policies that guide that. And it's important to follow those policies to ensure that you don't have someone sitting in the room who's upset and can then say, hey, you guys have a policy in place on how you actually elect people, and you're supposed to notify everyone in advance of the elections of who's on the ballot, and you didn't do that. So now I think that you're acting in a way that's discriminatory. So it's just something, again, to be aware of, that these policies that define how we operate and how decisions are made are in place to protect CSCMP as an organization. Any questions on that? So I'm going to wrap up real quick by just talking about member services, because I think this is what all of you at the roundtables do really well. All of you are the local face of CSCMP. There's a lot of members who will never know who any of the top leadership is at CSCMP or who any of the staff are, but they'll know all of you. So all of you are the local faces. And it's important that we provide a service that is consistent and clear. And when a customer comes to CSCMP at a roundtable level, whether they're in Toronto or whether they're in Milwaukee or whether they're in South Florida, that they have a consistent experience. How many of you have been to McDonald's in the last year? How many of you were asked if you want to supersize it? Everyone, because that's just what happens. It's consistent. So no matter where you go to McDonald's, you're getting a consistent experience. So being part of CSCMP means that, when someone shows up at your events, that there is specific literature on the table, that they go through a registration platform that is, I believe, supported by CSCMP. So there's elements in place that will ensure that your members, who are your customers, remember we're in a business here, that your customers are getting a clear and consistent experience no matter what roundtable they go to. Because one of the points Mark made was, we're all kind of in this together. We're all kind of looking to get to the same goal. And having a solid member experience and a consistent member experience helps to facilitate that. And one of the other pieces that I think I saw in the policy manual was that, you want to do like a membership pitch at the beginning of every roundtable, as a way to just inform those non-members who are there in attendance of all the great things that CSCMP has to offer. So with that being said, are there any other kind of best practices that all of you have as far as policies surrounding that member experience? I talked a little bit about the event management software, the membership announcements. CSCMP has policies on pricing for both members and non-members. Are there any other policies you can think of that kind of support that consistent member experience? I think that was most of the ones I saw. Good. Well, so we talked today about these 3 elements of good governance. And again, good governance providing a framework for all of you to have a successful year, for all of you and your leadership team to understand how are the operations of CSCMP run and how do my roundtable operations need to be run? How is CSCMP as a business, how do they account for their finances? What is expected of me when it comes to serving my members? And again, I think one of the reasons why this leadership retreat wanted to kick off with this message is just again to understand we're all part of one big organization, one CSCMP. And the role and the work that all of you do at the local level facilitates the national brand and the national mission and the international mission of CSCMP. And I'd like for all of you to think about this governance as a framework for success and not like a needless inhibitor. So next time you have to submit that quarterly report and you're like, oh man, I don't have time for this. Why do I have to do this? Remember that it's important because it provides that structure and framework and it protects CSCMP as a tax-exempt organization. So with that, are there any questions before I close? I hope that's a good thing. Yes?
I'm just curious, since you're involved in another professional organization, how this organization's policies and procedures compares in terms of rigor and depth.
Well, I was gonna say, I feel like the policy, our structure is a little different because our chapters are all separately incorporated, so they all actually have to file their own taxes